Time we get off our assets. Vince Graham back with part 13 in the series describing ideas for Patriots Point, that 400 acres of prized public land in Mount Pleasant just across the Cooper River from downtown Charleston. Historian Lewis Mumford provides an opening thought about the importance of human scale. Mumford also said the trend is not destiny. Just because we've been experiencing things one way, even for generations, doesn't mean this will necessarily continue. Our discussion is divided into three parts. A Tale of Four Cities will provide background information. Part B covers the psychology and politics which undermine common sense about urban policy, and Part C explores transportation alternatives. So with apologies to Charles Dickens, let's get started with the Tale of Four Cities. 2010 census data was recently unveiled. The first census was taken in 1790 when there were only 13 states. The four largest cities were New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and Charleston. New York had 33,000 people, Philadelphia about 29,000, Boston about 18,000, and Charleston close to 16,400. Fast forward to last year, New York was still first and Philadelphia fifth. Boston had fallen to 22nd and Charleston 210th. Why did Charleston fall so far behind? Here's a table showing the population from 1790 to 1860, and here's how the numbers look graphically. Over this period, the population of New York City grew an astounding 2,300% to 814,000 people. Philadelphia grew fourfold to 143,000, Boston almost ninefold to 178,000, and the Holy City grew 150% to 40,500. Slightly larger than New York in 1790, and about the same size as Philadelphia in 1800 and Boston in 1820. Here's another chart showing the cities over the same time frame, but with the percentage increase each decade. New York is in blue, Philadelphia in yellow, Boston green, and Charleston red. The northern cities experienced positive population growth every decade, but Charleston was flat between 1810 and 1820, and actually had negative growth between 1830 and 40, and again between 1850 and 60. Why? The northern cities grew because of a huge European immigration. Charleston had not experienced the same growth because of slavery. Think about it. If you lived in Europe and were considering a move to America for work, why go someplace where you had to compete with slave labor? Furthermore, the slaveocracy, which ran things in our state, didn't want free labor competing with slave labor and didn't encourage immigration. Charleston simply didn't offer the same opportunities as could be found in the northern cities and thus fell behind. We'll see the same lag in modern times. This chart shows the population of the city from 1940 to 2010. Red indicates people living on the peninsula, and blue those off the peninsula. Note how the first three columns show only red. This was because up until 1960 the city was confined to the peninsula. In 1940 Charleston had a population of 71,000 people. Thereafter the city population declined. It lost 1% between 1940 and 50 and dropped another 6% by 1960. The mayor at the time, Palmer Gilliard, and other leaders grew desperate. What could be done to stem this loss of population and tax base? They settled on a strategy of annexation and road building. Annexation involved extending the city limits over the Ashley River and into the suburbs to recover lost population and tax base. Road building involved widening and extending roads like Savannah Highway, as well as downtown streets to expedite car travel on and off the peninsula. For example, take a look at this area. Highlighted in yellow is the old street network. The Crosstown Expressway, shown in red, tore right through the network with a high-speed, high-capacity road design. Cannon and Spring Streets, as well as Ashley, Rutledge, Cumming, and King Streets, were converted from two-way into one-way traffic, again for the purpose of expediting car travel in and out of downtown. King Street and short segments of Ashley and Rutledge have since been converted back to two-way streets. High automobile speeds crowd out other forms of transportation like walking and bike riding. Prioritizing car movement in this way makes a city less livable. Another example, I-26. The National Defense and Interstate Bill was passed in 1956 during President Eisenhower's reign. It was inspired by the Autobahn built by Hitler and the Nazis prior to World War II. But not even the Nazis were callous enough to build high-speed roads through the middle of cities. I-26 was intended to terminate at Cosgrove Avenue, but Mayor Gilliard had it extended several miles south to US 17, once again to get cars in and out of the city as fast as possible, advancing a culture of hurriedness that violated the Low Country's tone of life. Here's a close-up view of I-26 with the underlying street grid in yellow and the interstate slashing through the urban fabric. This decision crushed adjacent neighborhoods. With few exceptions, this kind of misguided policy was carried out in every city in the country. The resulting scars and blight disenfranchised those residing next to the high-speed roads. And after 45 years, the city's tax base, livability, and stormwater system continue to suffer. Among the few places this destructive policy was stopped was in Manhattan. Robert Moses, the public works czar of New York, who in 1962 opened the Cross Bronx Expressway shown here, proposed to build the Lower Manhattan Expressway, or LOMEX, a 10-lane elevated expressway through Soho. He met his match in Jane Jacobs, who had just written a great book which caused people to rethink destructive transportation policy. Jacobs helped organize a community to stop LOMEX. Unfortunately, what began as a trickle in 1940 turned into a flood in the 60s. In the decade ending in 1970, in which the harmful transportation policies were applied, downtown lost 19,000 residents, 29% of its population. Mayor Riley was elected in 1975. He managed to slow the bleeding, but the population of the peninsula continued to decline to the point where the 2010 census shows the peninsula's population down to 34,600, less than half its level in 1950. However, by annexing land and growing the city from 3,700 to 70,000 acres, the city picked up 85,000 people to bring the total population to 120,000. Today, 71% of Charleston's population lives in the burbs and 29% on the peninsula. The city limits in 1960 was 66,000 people on 3,700 acres, and the city of Charleston today with 120,000 on 70,000 acres, 35,000 downtown and 85,000 in the suburbs. Charleston, with its land area of 70,000 acres, is bigger than Boston and Washington, D.C. combined. It has a land area larger than 10 countries. Compare Charleston suburbs to Mount Pleasant, which in 1950 was a sleepy fishing village with 1,500 people. Since that time, the physical size of Mount Pleasant has grown 100-fold, and it now has a population of more than 68,000 people. It kind of seems like Mount Pleasant is in a race with Charleston to see which can sprawl faster. Even if you combine the size and population of the city off the peninsula with the size and remaining people on the peninsula, Charleston still has a lower population density than Mount Pleasant. So, in the race to sprawl, Charleston is the clear winner. Not really something to cheer about. It remains to be seen if it will hold on to this lead, because County Council just rejected the sprawl-inducing I-526 extension to Johns and James Island. Meanwhile, Mount Pleasant just broke ground on $182 million worth of road projects. This seems strange in light of the fact that traffic volumes on US 17 peaked a few years back and have declined since. Maybe it's worth considering geopolitical and geological factors that seem to point to a long-term trend of increasing energy prices. Would it make sense for elected officials to reconsider a strategy of spending dwindling resources on infrastructure that perpetuates automobile dependency? Just asking. Anyway, getting back to our tale of four cities. Recall that before the 60s, Charleston was only 3,700 acres. Compare this with the physical size of Manhattan in blue, Philadelphia in yellow, and Boston green. By the way, in this chart, I'm only referring to Manhattan, not New York's other boroughs. You can see the aggressive annexation program of Charleston in red, which began in the 60s. Today, Charleston's land area is 5 times that of Manhattan, more than twice that of Boston, and approaching the size of Philadelphia. Following these flawed growth policies, the city metastasized into surrounding countryside. Ever wonder why the South Carolina Department of Transportation is in such horrible fiscal shape? Annexation policies have contributed to too much infrastructure relative to the population. These sprawling patterns also explain why the Charleston Area Regional Transportation Authority is in perennial trouble. Agency is simply overtasked with a huge service area of extremely low density development patterns. Back to our tale. Over the last 70 years, the size of Manhattan, Boston, and Philadelphia have been steady, while Charleston grew to 70,000 acres. This chart shows population change since 1940. New York in blue, Philly in yellow, and Boston green. Now this only shows the population of Charleston's peninsula, not its suburbs. As we've seen, downtown has been losing population since 1940, though fortunately the past decade saw the slowest rate in 60 years. Between 1940 and 50, the northern cities showed gains in population, but over the next 30 years, as new transportation policies were implemented, mangling older neighborhoods, all 4 cities lost population. Manhattan Manhattan and Boston gained population in the 80s and the 90s, and even Philadelphia grew over the last decade. So why did Manhattan, Philadelphia, and Boston grow while the peninsula continued to lose residents? It couldn't have been a lack of effort in counting people, as in 2010, Mayor Riley and College of Charleston President Benson went door to door encouraging college students to fill out census forms. Their efforts paid off, as some parts of the peninsula, those with large student populations, gained over the last decade, while south of Broad, the French Quarter, and Anson Borough lost residents. Why? There are many reasons: higher housing costs, poor schools, dilapidated infrastructure. Also, unlike New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, which aggressively encourage new construction within the city, Charleston's approval process has become so complicated and involves getting the blessing of your neighbors and various special interest groups. Unless you're a well-connected developer or government institution with deep financial resources, it's really tough to build on the peninsula. Restraining trade undermines opportunity for new growth. Another reason the city keeps losing population is because its suburban transportation vision perpetuates automobile dependency and harms urban life. For example, consider that more than 4 million people a year visit the peninsula. They come to the visitor center, take horse carriage and bus tours, shop on King Street, stay at hotels, go to the farmers market, and now twice a week board mega cruise ships. Add to the 4 million tourists tens of thousands of daily commuters, people traveling to the hospital, courthouse, and the wonderful things the city has to offer, from theatrical productions, dinner at fine restaurants, and sporting events at its colleges. In fact, if you could add up all the annual visits to the peninsula, you'd reach a level close to 20 million, about the same number of people who visit Venice, Italy each year, or Disney World's Magic Kingdom. However, unlike Venice or the Magic Kingdom, the primary means of arrival and departure to the peninsula is the automobile, which requires storage when not being driven around. Check this out. One of the busiest places downtown, the block surrounding Meeting Street and Market Street. In addition to hundreds of parking spaces along streets, the shapes in red are parking garages, and those shown in blue are parking lots. Now, fortunately, the city is adept at making these structures less obnoxious. They are often hidden behind historic structures like this one. Quality landscaping materials are used in construction. The tremendous attention given to making cars happy is a result of an expedient effort to suburbanize the city. It's one reason why European cities tend to be beautiful and American cities ugly. Moreover, politicians and design officials like planners, engineers, and architects readily accept as a foregone conclusion that everyone will arrive and depart by car, which must be parked as close as possible to the destination, as if the city were a strip mall. We'll explain why they think this way in the next part. Let's conclude with the latest example of this mindset: the State Ports Authority's Union Pier plan, which envisions redeveloping this publicly owned waterfront site into a new terminal surrounded by 10 acres of asphalt to accommodate car movement and storage of cruise ship patrons. This blue line indicates an extension of Concord Street. Very good thing. Not so good as what is shown in yellow, asphalt surrounding the new terminal. Here's the satellite view of the site with the Concord Street extension and where the new parking lots are planned. To put it in perspective, here at the same scale is the Citadel's football stadium. Overlaying on the Union Pier site, it would fill one parking lot. This is Marion Square, about 5 acres, overlaid on the Union Pier site. It looks like this. And here's the waterfront part, a half-mile south of the new terminal site, and showing it on Union Pier. Now for fun, let's look at the old Kmart in Mount Pleasant, with its 5-acre parking lot, and substitute Marion Square, shown in purple, with the Kmart parking lot. Does something like this belong in downtown Charleston? Expanding the supply of parking feeds a vicious circle of automobile dependency. This is a dead end, and is a principal reason the population of the peninsula is now below what it was in 1850. Hopefully, a new vision will emerge in time so that the population won't fall to what it was in 1830. Thanks for watching. The next part will examine the psychology and politics that have resulted in dehumanizing our cities. And then in the final part, we'll examine alternative transportation strategies for Patriots Point. These ideas will also be applicable to cities like Charleston. I hope you'll tune in.